Go.
Good morning or good afternoon at this point. Thank you. Welcome to a special live episode of Writer Mother Monster. Writer Mother Monster is a community and conversation series devoted to dismantling the myth of having it all and offering writer moms solidarity, support, and advice. The show is typically streamed live on Facebook and YouTube and then released as an audio podcast on all major platforms. As you've heard, I'm your host, Laura Ehrlich, and before I introduce our special guest, let me thank Connecticut Lit Fest for having us, especially Jotham Borello, gentleman and fearless festival organizer, and the team of incredible staff and volunteers who made this event happen, as well as Real Art Ways for hosting us. After the show, you can find me at the table for Thought Fox Writer's Den, which is a writing center and artisan writing store in Stonington, Connecticut, and online, that builds community and supports writers of all levels with in-person and virtual workshops, coaching, events, and more. I also want to acknowledge that we are standing, or as the case may be, sitting on the traditional land of the Paquanuk, Sikok, Wagunks, and Tunsis people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it through the generations. You can learn more at nativeland.ca. Finally, a special thanks to our sponsors and patrons listed on the Writer Mother Monster website. Your support helps make the show possible. All right, now I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Dr. Janet Garcia-Hallett. Dr. Hallett is a criminal justice professor at the University of New Haven's Henry C. Lee College of Criminal Justice and Forensic Sciences. She earned her PhD in criminal justice from Rutgers University-Newark in 2017. And from 2017 to 2021, she worked as a criminal justice professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. At this point during the pandemic, she made the decision to move back to the East Coast to be closer to family and a support network. And as an Afro-Latina mother, Dr. Garcia-Hallett has maintained a personal interest in mothers' experiences before, during, and after incarceration. Her nonfiction book, Invisible Mothers, Unseen Yet Hypervisible After Incarceration, is based on interviews she conducted throughout New York City with formerly incarcerated mothers of color. Her book shares mothers' stories and explores how mothers of color navigate motherhood post-incarceration. Although Dr. Garcia-Hallett was first drawn to this work due to her upbringing in Harlem, she continues to study the impact of the criminal legal system and advocate for communities of color. Janet has 3 children, ages 7, 4, and 2, and she describes writer motherhood in 3 words as versatile, determined, and badass. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So let's start with those 3 words you used to describe writer motherhood. Tell us about versatile, determined, and badass.
Well, the first word that really came to mind was badass, but I'll start with versatile. So versatile because to be a writer mother, you have to adjust, you have to adapt to everything. As mothers, we're literally everything. We're the teacher, we're the cook, we're the doctor. Like we have so many roles even within this identity as mothers. And then on top of that, trying to do something outside of that maternal identity and write a book that's external to that maternal identity, really needing to adjust and be able to accomplish everything and navigate everything. So that's where determined comes in. So needing to be determined in the midst of complicated circumstances, in the midst of so many overlapping roles, responsibilities, circumstances, and really needing to be determined to work on that book, to write and take some time to write for yourself. And that's where, for me, determined really comes in. And then just badass for being able to navigate and manage everything. So I was like, can I curse? Because that's literally the first word that came to mind.
Yes, yes, and we can curse. This is
okay.
Hopefully it's okay to curse in here, but Writer Mother Monster, we curse We can have alcohol. Usually it's wine, but since it's midday, I'll stick with beer. Yeah, and sometimes because it's a live show, not today, but often children come in and we've had pets sort of jump up in front of things. So
Yeah.
anything can happen with writer motherhood or just with writerhood. So I know we're here today and this is an inclusive audience with men as well and maybe fathers or folks who don't have children but have full-time jobs. So we can talk about how to balance all of those things. And I shouldn't say balance because one thing I've learned in doing this podcast is that's impossible. So let's start there. How have you tried to balance all of your various responsibilities, and have you found it's possible? I have not.
I
but
have
maybe you
not. I have not. And I
Okay.
try to say try to balance, to take a more positive approach and not say that it's just impossible, even though it really feels like that all the time. So for some additional context, I'm also a military spouse. So my husband is in the military and he's also in law enforcement. So he used to be active duty. Right now he's reserve, but he still goes on very long trainings, 2 weeks, a month, month and a half, et cetera. And it varies. You can never really plan for it. And I'm a professor. I'm a criminal justice professor. We have set schedules. I know a year out exactly what I'm going to teach, the days and times, et cetera, or they at least need to know when students register. So my schedule tends to be very strict and set at least a year out, whereas my partner's schedule is the complete opposite. So with that being said, I have to plan as if I'm managing everything on my own because of the schedule of his. That's not quite a schedule. So that requires a lot of planning as much as possible on my part, relying on family support, other moms in the town, like, hey, can you pick up my son and take him to this practice? Or can you help be my emergency contact if I'm stuck at work and I have a 40-minute drive? So I realize there's a difference when I have a support network outside of immediate family, people that live close in town who I can call on in case of emergency. And that has made a drastic difference. Mm-hmm. So as you mentioned in the bio, I moved from Kansas City back to the East Coast to have more of that support network because I felt a little bit alone in Kansas City. And it wasn't the city itself, it's the Midwest, but it wasn't the city. It was just not really having as many friends or mom friends who were in the same situation. Whereas now I have friends who are about an hour out. And to me, that's close. So we're used to 19, 21 hours out. Now an hour is nothing. So being able to call on friends, meet other couples who have been extremely helpful has made the difference. So that has helped create a little bit more of a balance, I'll say.
Yeah, I think that's great, a great point and some great advice too, hidden in there to find a community of support.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And now with social media as well, that makes it so much easier
to
find like-minded folks to vent to or to just talk to about all these issues that were
Facebook groups
for sure.
So when moving, I joined a few Facebook groups in my town just to get to know the area before moving across the country. And then there was one post and people shared like, oh, the ages of their children and how long they were in town. So I learned a lot of people were moving during the pandemic like I did. Yep. So I met a lot of people who are new to the town who also had young children. And I was like, let's be friends. I'm not there yet, but when I get there, let's be friends. Let's meet. Let's have play dates. And some, it actually played out when I moved. We actually like met at the park or something like low key. And we're still in touch now. And it's been 2 years. Yeah. So that's one thing that I did moving back to the East Coast that I didn't do moving to Kansas City. But now I was more proactive in trying to create a support network and find a support network that made a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'll come back to community because that's so central, I think, to what we're talking about today and what we're all doing here at the CT Lit Fest. This is our community, right? But let's turn to, we're going to take a hard left and turn to criminal justice.
Yes.
So tell us how you found your way to that field.
So I grew up in Harlem. My family's from Honduras. When they first came to the country, they came to New York. They went to New York. So I grew up in New York, in Harlem. And growing up in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of drugs. There was a lot of violence I was exposed to. So just always having an interest within the criminal legal system. But my interest was more so in terms of individuals who were victims to substance use and whatnot. And when they went missing, I always thought, okay, like maybe they're in a program or maybe they're getting help. But then really realizing it wasn't that help or wasn't a program. It was really that they were being incarcerated for navigating their substance use. So that really kind of exposed me to how when individuals were suffering, instead of being given the help or resources that they needed, they were being criminalized. So that shaped my interest in studying the criminal justice system, studying criminal justice. I went to Hunter College as a CUNY in New York, took classes over the park at John Jay. And when it came time to go to graduate school, I continued my graduate studies in criminal justice, specifically to hear from people's own experiences, their own narratives, and not just from more of a punitive side, but allowing them the space to share their stories and kind of what happened in their journey, essentially.
Yeah, and what drew you to the mother side of this story?
Yes, I get that question often.
Yeah.
So when I was in school, oftentimes we hear about men. Our prisons, our jails, our parole is mostly composed of men. So always hear, like, read literature, hear news articles, hear the news media, and they're always talking about men, specifically men of color. And I was interning at an organization, Correctional Association of New York, and they would have coalition meetings. They were allowed access into prisons to see what was going on inside the prisons. Are they adhering to policies that are in place? And I was surrounded by women who'd been in the prison system. So here I was studying criminal justice, reading all about men, only men, reading these theories that are focused on men. They only studied men and focused on masculinity and things of that nature. But in my internship, I was meeting women, mothers. They were there with their children in these meetings, sharing their experiences, being pregnant behind bars, being shackled during delivery, after delivery and recovery. And these are stories that I was not hearing as a student studying the impact of the criminal justice system. So I was like, I have to share their stories. So I focused on interviewing mothers for my dissertation research. And the goal was to do it in New York, my own home. And I interviewed mothers all throughout New York City, all the boroughs except for Staten Island, because it's kind of hard to get there. And so I interviewed 37 mothers all throughout New York City, and just told them, I'm a student, I'm a criminal justice student. I want to hear from you what your journey was like before incarceration, during incarceration, and after incarceration. And more often than not, they were surprised that I was even interested in hearing their stories, because they weren't accustomed to people even asking for their input or asking for their life journey. They were just used to others kind of being focused on how could you do that as a mother? Did you think about your children, kind of being more punitive towards them, but not really willing to listen about what their journey was like to get to that point. So they were surprised, but they were happy to share, their stories with me, which kind of turned into the book project.
Yeah. And before we get to the book, so you were doing this work before you had children, it sounds like?
So I started interviewing them in 2014, 2015, before I was a mother. Mm-hmm. I became a mother in 2016. So I can talk a little bit about like me speaking with them and interviewing them. I was already, so torn by their experiences and connecting with them. But once I became a mother, it was like a completely different level. It was like, this is hard. Like this is hard for just my first child. And being at the time, I moved to a different state to join my husband. I didn't know the area. I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anyone moving to North Carolina at the time. So to imagine, going through incarceration and not having a support network and having multiple children, I was even more sympathetic to their experiences. So I became a mother in the process. Then actually became mother to 3 in the process. So, and with that, even being more adamant about supporting them in their journey.
Yeah. Did you learn any lessons from the women who you interviewed that you brought with you into motherhood?
Oh, that's a really good question. Something that I learned from the mothers that I brought in, I didn't know anything about motherhood going into the journey. To me, everything was just a learning process. And of course, sometimes you may do like parenting classes. They may show you how to breastfeed, or they may show you how to change a diaper and things like that. But I think for me, it was just really going through the process of having a baby to take care of, to really learn things. So I think everything that I've tried to learn before motherhood pretty much either went out the window, or it was nothing like actually going through it myself. So
yeah.
I would say that.
Yeah. We talk about that a lot on the show. If you watch past episodes, just the as much preparation as you can manage to do before you give birth, it just doesn't really prepare you for having
I
the
still felt
experience of having children.
unprepared.
I do too. My daughter's 7. I have no idea what I'm doing. It's always new, different
It definitely
experience.
felt new.
Yeah.
And then my oldest also had some health complications too. So on top of being in a new state alone, the week after I moved, my husband needed to leave for a month for military. So I was in a new state, uncomfortable driving, being a New Yorker. And then when he was born, he had a lot of health complications. So everything that was tried to like given to me in terms of information completely went out the window. But now I kind of feel like, oh, if I manage that, I can manage anything. So
yeah, I feel that way about giving birth. It's like I gave birth, I can do anything, right? Yeah. So let's go back to the book now and talk a little bit about these women. And this might be a good moment if you'd like to read us just a little taste of your book and maybe show everyone the cover. And here, I'll turn this too.
So this is the cover of the book, Invisible Mothers, Unseen Yet Hypervisible After Incarceration. And for those of you close, you could probably see the same mother, she's looking forward, but she's also looking sideways. So in creating the book cover, I told the publisher that I really wanted to capture how you can be strong, you can feel resilient, but at the same time, feel like you're being broken down and struggling on the inside. So within the same mother, looking forward and looking to the side, being able to capture that kind of, it's not just a dichotomy. You can feel strong and feel weak at the same time. And that was their reality in these experiences. And her daughter is right there on the side of the book cover.
So this is this a real one of the women in your book?
This is not one of the women. And all the names in the book, they're pseudonyms to protect their identity. So they're fake names that are picked within the book. And the names match their racial ethnic background. But all of the names are fake names in order to protect their identity. Great. So what I can do is I'll share a little bit from the book just to kind of show a little bit of the commonality of their experiences that may lead them into incarceration. I forgot to smile, right? Gotta remember to smile. So this is from chapter 1 called Mother Work. It's always been a very demanding job, said Vanessa about mother work, the care and labor devoted toward children. She was a 25-year-old mother who lived in a shelter with her intimate partner and her only child. I'm just 5, interrupted her 5-year-old daughter, who was playing nearby. Though Vanessa believed motherhood in and of itself was a very demanding job, she cherished her maternal role. I mean, sometimes it's overwhelming, sometimes it gets there, but it's nothing that I've given up. Approximately 2 years before we spoke, Vanessa had been released from incarceration for an assault charge. She had been found guilty of assault against someone who mistreated her daughter while babysitting. Vanessa believed her actions were justified since she was protecting her daughter, saying it was all for her. She believed that mothers should care for their children and that good mothers prioritize putting their children's interests before their own. This understanding of good mothers is similar to dominant social narratives about motherhood. However, for Vanessa and many others like her, protecting her daughter is what led to her incarceration. So oftentimes I found that when people talk about women and specifically mothers who've been incarcerated, it's usually with such a negative and punitive, and how could you do that? Like assumptions that they are really violent. But in reality, women are often incarcerated for non-violent offenses. It's usually for drug possession because they're battling with substance use as a form of coping. Oftentimes, about 56%, 60%, they have been victimized or traumatized, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and emotional abuse, and go to substance use as a form of coping with all that trauma that they've experienced. But they can be incarcerated for merely possession. Oftentimes we're doing stuff under the, my son is actually trying to video call me right now, speaking about motherhood. And then oftentimes for doing something under the influence of the substances as well, or property crimes for trying to manage everything that you have to, but you can't afford it, and doing things on your own. So substance use, possession of those drugs, and then also property crimes. of the most common experiences that women have who are in the criminal legal system. So that's just a quick snippet to show how common it is.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And something that, so much of what you read struck me, and I'm sure our audience, but something that struck me was the concept of a good mother.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's something we talk about a lot on the show is what is a good mother? What is a bad mother? Should we define motherhood in such terms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in fiction, we talk about likable women or unlikable women.
Yeah.
And there's such a, many readers negatively critique a book for a female protagonist who is unlikable, right? Or flawed or complex. So here we're talking about real women, real mothers. But I think it all kind of ties together as we're thinking about our work, about our writing, about characters who are complex and flawed and strong and weak at the same time, as you said earlier. So let's turn back to your life. Did you have a concept of what kind of mother you wanted to be? What defines a good mother? And how is your sort of perception of what kind of mother you want to be changed maybe as you've actually become a mother and started mothering?
That's such a good question. And before that, I want to highlight, they also talked a lot about this concept of what it meant to be a good mother and whether they view themselves as bad mothers. And they will always say, I'm not a bad mother, I just made a bad decision, or I just did something that was bad, but that doesn't define who I am as a person. So they would say, despite me having been incarcerated, despite what I've done in the past, I'm not a bad mother. Maybe what I did was bad, or I made a bad decision, but that doesn't define who I am as a human being. So that's just something I want to highlight about them, that more common than not, they would say to anyone who criticized them or their backgrounds that I am not a bad mother. Maybe I made a bad decision, but that doesn't define who I am as a person.
It seems like a very strong stance to take. Did you find, and then we'll go back to you, did you find that the women that you spoke to was it the majority who had that sort of strength of self-awareness to say, I am not a bad mother, I just made bad choices? Or were there women who felt like they were bad mothers and were grappling with that?
Sometimes they would say, I was bad, but now I've learned that I'm not a bad person, that I just made bad decisions. So in the midst of those complicated circumstances, in the midst of battling with the victimization and the traumatization, and they're trying to find a more positive way to manage that, sometimes they will say, like, I was a bad mother at that time, but now I've realized I just made those bad decisions, but that doesn't define who I am as a person. And I think that happened over time and trying to go through programming, go through counseling, and getting that support that maybe they didn't have beforehand, that they were able to view things in a different way that was more healing for them, that was more positive for them, than it was harmful for themselves. So I would say that. And you asked about myself. Has my view of mothering changed over time? I would say with going from 1 to 3 children, wow, that is a big difference. And as I mentioned, like with my first, he was born, he had some health complications with some food allergies, and he was hospitalized for eczema at 3 months old, like all the things I did not think would happen. And then I felt like I can manage anything. Let's try for number 2. And then it was okay at that point, but being outnumbered is definitely a different journey. So one thing I would say with each stage is learning something new. So as he got older, learning, I have to make time for homework now, because now he has homework and he's working on math and reading, and there's a new math now. So with that, learning as he's learning. Now he's interested in sports. Well, now that requires me to travel to sports games and sports practices. And so I think with each stage of motherhood, when supporting them as they're taking those first steps, it's like, okay, like how do I support my child as he's trying to learn how to walk? Supporting that child when they're starting school, whether they're starting daycare or they're starting school for the first time and they're nervous being around peers. Now, how do I find a way to help him or help my daughter feel comfortable in this new experience that they're going through. Now my son is nervous, but he's interested in sports. How do I get him comfortable with it himself to do the thing that he wants to do, but he's still a little bit shy? So all these different stages and kind of learning in the process as they're going through those stages, there was no preparation for it. I just had to figure it out in a sense as going. But being outnumbered has definitely been quite interesting, I'll say. I feel like I'm always running around and going from one place to another. Usually the car ride is when I catch up with people on the phone. I call my mom every morning. I usually call my best friend in the evenings, just to catch up with friends and have a way of doing something for me while I'm always doing something for someone else, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was one way that you mentioned that you make some time for you.
Yes.
And I find that that is one of the single most difficult things as a mother and a writer, and someone who has various jobs, like probably many of you do. So how do you make that space for yourself, both as a woman, not a mother, but like as a person, as a woman, and as a writer?
I love the gym now, and I never used to before. But I specifically like the YMCA because they have childcare with it. So I can work out, do something for me, Zumba. That's kind of my safe space, my happy space. I love to dance, and it's a workout at the same time. And the YMCA has a kids club where they watch your children. And I have 3. So for someone to watch my 3 children while I work out is a nice kind of form of self-care, and it's also healthy for me too. So that's something that I do, and I literally protect as a meeting. Every Monday at 6, I'm at the Southernton YMCA doing Zumba, and I protect it as a Monday. I'll try to do everything else, on a different day, but protect that because it's for me. So that's one thing I do. I check in with friends, usually during phone calls, so they know when I've made it to my destination, because I will get off the phone and say, okay, I have to go and do something else. But those phone calls while I'm driving, it's 40 minutes, 20 minutes. But that's a way just to check in. And I love to listen to music. So I'll arrive on campus listening to my favorite music. And then, all right, as soon as you're there, it's down to business. Let's get to work. So music brings me joy. Dancing brings me joy. Being able to go to the gym and do something fun and healthy for myself has been my self-care.
Yeah, I love hearing people's different versions of self-care and how they do, and scheduling that time sounds so unromantic. It's like when you say like schedule a date with your husband, but it's true. I think unless it's on your Google Calendar, you're going to fill it with something else, right?
Yes, you have to. All right, if we're going to have a date every week, once every week, once every 2 weeks, we have to do something for us, because if you don't put it on the calendar or have it in mind, then it can fall through the cracks. And then time will go on and time will go on, and you don't do something for yourself, or you don't do something with your partner that you enjoy. And work will always be there. You'll always have deadlines. You'll always have expectations that other people will put upon you. So if you don't give yourself that goal, if you don't give yourself that time, then someone else will take it.
Yeah. And so logistically, how did you write and complete your book so all 3 kids were born during the course of the research and the writing?
Yes.
So tell us about the logistics of writing with small children and teaching and all the other things.
A very long process. So I did the interviews 2014 into 2015. My oldest was born 2016. I graduated with my PhD 2017. So just to kind of give a timeline of everything. And it was at that point in 2017 that I started to revamp the dissertation into a book. So what I thought I was writing somewhat towards a book was not the reality. So I needed to, because it was for the dissertation, I needed to meet those academic requirements, but I knew I needed to completely revamp the book for a more public audience outside of academia. So I started that in 2017. And with each child, it became a little bit more complicated to find that time to write, especially with the health complications and whatnot. So sometimes I would literally be wearing the baby and bouncing him in on my computer and writing. Sometimes I would literally be holding him with one arm and typing with one hand. So I see some eyes and some head nods in the audience. But it was it was the reality of trying to multitask. So maybe that's another word that I was really thinking about, like as writer mothers, really being able to multitask, not only in the household, not only for work, but when you want to fit in something else that's meaningful for you. So literally bouncing the baby and writing, or literally cooking and bouncing the baby and doing multiple things, or on the phone, holding the baby because he was very clingy with his skin condition, and using the other hand and doing something else. So I did a lot of multitasking, sometimes pumping and doing other things at the same time. It was all the things under the sun. But I would say it was probably the most difficult at the younger stages, and then it will become easier as maybe they each turned 1 years old. Um, and then the pandemic happened also in the midst of that, 2020, and all the children were home, and I was expected to work from home as well. So the pandemic was extremely difficult, a lot of emotional instability. So I also had to focus on myself during the pandemic as well. So I did take some steps away from working on the book. It took longer than I originally expected to finish the book with the pandemic happening in 2020, where I thought I would be done maybe about 6 months to a year sooner than I really was. But I had to focus on my own mental well-being during the pandemic as a mother and as a writer too, right? Because if you don't focus on yourself too, you can't really support other individuals, even though there's that expectation. So a lot of ups and downs. It's like a roller coaster being a writer mother, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell us about the highest point of being a writer mother.
Finishing the book and it finishing the book and it being published, and thinking to myself, I really did it. It's really published. It's out there, and people are giving me their feedback and their insight on it. So I would say this past year, it came out November of last year. So this past year has absolutely been the highlight. There was a point in time where I was still in disbelief, and thinking, that's my name on the book? That's me. So it was really that space of shock and disbelief for a while. And then just complete joy as people started to actually read it and give me insight on the book. And again, it was a difficult topic, and making sure I did the woman justice and sharing their stories, and them being vulnerable with me to share their stories. So I spent a lot of time also focusing on the language and the stories, and being able to contextualize so others can understand them. So that was also a heavy burden to carry as well. So.
Yes. Have you heard from any of the mothers? Did they read the book? What did they say?
So there's one particular mother who I knew even before I officially interviewed her. She was a part of that same organization. And I did a book talk where I allowed her to come join me for the book talk. It was actually at my own university, University of New Haven. She joined me for the book talk, and she shared her experience with the students and faculty and whatnot. But one thing that when people often go through a lot of trauma and go through some difficult experiences, they often want to help others. So she's actually got her degree in social work, and in order to help other women who've been through the system.
Oh, wow. Wow. And so what were her thoughts, and maybe some of the other women's thoughts about the book and about seeing their stories out in the world? And did they receive, well, they're not anonymous, but they have different names. But so
Yes.
Did they share the book with anyone that they know? Did they sort of get feedback about their stories?
So I'm not sure if they've shared books with, out of the one who I maintain contact with now, I'm not sure if they've shared the book with others. Or if others would be able to pinpoint like exactly who they were. But for that particular woman who joined me for the book talk at the University of New Haven, she shared during that book talk that she was always reserved about sharing her experiences. She didn't really talk too much about it because of all the stigma with being incarcerated. So with us, talking in 2014, 2015, it was one of the first times she really opened up about the full extent of her story and how her children felt towards her and responded to her incarceration. So she shares, like she loves it, especially when there's examples about her. Like she gets pretty excited, and how I also contextualize that compared to other women's experiences. So at one point, when I spoke with her on the interview, she called herself like a money addict. But that's also language that's imposed upon individuals who may have committed a property offense. So she never considered herself a money addict, but this was language that was continually used to label her and put her in a treatment program to focus on fixing the woman, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not fixing the woman, it's fixing the circumstances so they don't need to try or need to feel like they need to commit a property offense in order to support themselves or support their children. So a lot, and we see this a lot in like reentry programs or treatment programs where the focus is so individualized. Oh, there's something wrong with you, so we have to fix you. Let's focus on you. Let's give you therapy. Let's give you counseling because you're the problem. Instead of looking at the full context or full circumstances that led to them feeling like, all right, maybe I need to commit a money fraud because I can't pay the bill or I don't have enough for food and I'm alone. So let's look at the full context, the full social context to see what's going on here and not just focus on that individual. So individualized in terms of our criminal legal system. And that's why we see that returning cycle when people are incarcerated, released, and going back in. The focus is not the individual. Let's look at the full social circumstances that are leading to incarceration.
Yeah, and you mentioned early on that a lot of the stories that you were hearing were about men, right?
Yes.
So can you tell us just a little bit about how men are viewed or treated in the criminal justice system versus women, particularly mothers?
So I'll start off with this. When fathers are incarcerated, the children usually stay in the same living circumstances because fathers usually aren't the primary caregivers of the children to begin with. So when fathers are incarcerated, the children usually were already with mom and stayed with mom. However, when the moms are incarcerated, more often than not, they were the primary caregivers of their children before their incarceration. So when mom is put behind bars, then other family members need to step in to bring the children in. And it's usually the grandma. So usually the grandma brings the children in. If not, the auntie or a cousin is a different family member. So that's housing instability for the children when the mom is incarcerated. So I'll start off with that. Just like in general public society, mothers tend to be the primary caregivers of children, even when they are incarcerated. So with that, that takes a toll on the family, financially, emotionally, physically, especially depending on the age of the grandparent, the grandma, who's usually the one bringing the children in. And you asked some of the differences in terms of men. Mm-hmm. So when men are released from incarceration, most of our programming cater to men more so than they do cater to women. If it's employment opportunities, most of those employment opportunities that cater to or provide opportunities for individuals with criminal records or even felonies, they tend to be construction, they tend to be manual labor, those type of jobs that have more men who are applying for those jobs, or they're looking for men to apply for those particular jobs. And sometimes there are customer service jobs. They'll say, yes, we'll hire someone who has a criminal record, and it may be gendered as well. But if it's a customer service job where they're expected to work with the general public, they may view, we don't want to risk it. It could be a potential risk for someone with a felony to work at our particular job, and they won't be offered that job. So it's really counterintuitive. It's problematic that these opportunities are said to be for individuals who have a criminal record also tend to be gendered and more so catered to men who are in the system.
Yep.
So
this might be a good moment to read a little bit more from the book if you like.
I wasn't ready. I don't know what else I should read from the book.
Yeah. Do you
give me a moment? I'll think about it.
Okay. Yeah, we'll come back to it. Give it some thought. We'll come back to it. But let's go back to you and motherhood. So tell us about your own mother and what sort of model she gave you for motherhood. Did you always want to be a mother? Tell us about growing up.
Yes. So my mom was born in Honduras, Sandra. My sister's actually here too. She came to join. My mom is definitely one to help everyone. She's definitely one to pray for everyone. She's so soft-spoken. She's so gentle. Someone can be yelling in the street who's a stranger, and she'll be the one to say, "It's okay, I'll pray for you." Someone's asking for food. She's the one to want to give them food. That's just how gentle, soft-spoken, caring my mom is. And my mom helps me so much. She's actually with her grandbabies right now while I'm here with you all doing this interview. But there's literally no one else like my mom, and I'll say that.
So what sort of expectations did she set for you, whether it's, consciously or unconsciously?
In terms of motherhood, just she always says patience hija. So we Spanish speakers. She always says patience hija, which means patience to my daughter, in terms of being able to manage everything, even when things get difficult in terms of balancing work and family and the children. She says it's okay, just breathe and take it easy, and in such a soft spoken way that's like, okay, I'll listen and I'll do it. You're right. I'll just take a deep breath and I'll be able to manage it. So I would say she's very religious too. We grew up in the church every Sunday. We had our church clothes, our nice dresses, and everything. So it's always in terms of bringing us in and making sure we pray with her whenever things get difficult.
Oh,
hmm
yeah.
So.
Did you always want to be a mother?
I did always want to be a mother, and just to continue our family name, and just bring another child into the world that was a part of me. So I always knew I wanted to be a mother. And I'm not sure what I thought it would be like, but sometimes I feel like what we see on movies and TVs is always the good and the jolly and the smiles and the pictures, and not the full reality that sometimes it can be difficult or overwhelming. And maybe now I see more of that, and now where it's okay to be realistic when things get difficult and share and talk about it. But I think as a child, all we saw was the more positive and hand holding and skipping through the park and all those nice pictures, or the pictures that come in a picture frame when you buy them.
Sure, yeah.
Those pictures with the flowers. And I feel like as children, that's what we mostly see to encourage us to follow these gender norms and expectations to become mothers. But less often do we hear, maybe are exposed to, when things become difficult, are difficult, and how to be okay for asking for help and navigating that, I would say. Um, so I think now, at least maybe now as a mother, I'm seeing more of those like support groups and say, hey, it really takes a village, and here's why. Not just it really takes a village and just be friends with one another, but it takes a village because it can be difficult at times. But we are here to support one another. So I'm not sure what I had in mind that motherhood would be like, but I just remember seeing all these nice pictures and the joy and the smiles. And then really realizing that it can be difficult sometimes balancing everything, and it's okay to say I'm having a hard time, if I'm not having a good day, so just be here and just talk to me to kind of help me cool down, essentially.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love that. It's true. You do see all of the pictures of,
Skipping through the
skipping
park and
families.
smiling and
Yeah.
playing in pillows and having pillow fights and
Yep.
all the things that, like, I don't remember that.
No.
Like,
No.
okay, I don't remember that, but
No, and now we have influencers too, social media influencers
that's
who
a
have like the
thing
beautiful
too.
white rooms with white
Oh,
clothing, and it's all
no.
it's like, I
White. Oh
can't wear
no.
white. No,
No,
all my
that
clothes
is
are
not a
black.
house with children.
No, totally.
The white walls, the white
Yep.
couches, the white tablecloths, like not in my house.
No,
We
no.
can barely have white walls.
Same. My daughter drew on our walls. She loves art, which is great, but I would prefer the art not be drawn onto the wall.
Yes.
But it does happen.
The couches and yes.
Yeah.
With markers and
Yeah.
paint. Yeah.
Yeah.
All the things.
Oh, all the things.
Yes.
Growing up with a mother who was the sort of a person who cares for everyone else and
Yeah.
gives to everyone else, was it hard for you to learn to ask for help? Or was it something that you felt comfortable doing from the get-go?
That's a really good question. Asking for help, I think to a degree, I always felt like I didn't need to ask for help. I was one of those students who was always good in school. I was the one that was actually good at math. Um, Funny enough, I disliked reading, but I still did well. So I always felt like I didn't need to ask for help. But when it came time that I needed the help when I became a mother, and my son was sick or I needed help, like, mommy, like, can you come help? Can you come for a week? Or I need to travel sometimes for work. Sometimes I have a conference, I'm away for 3 or 4 days, and I need someone to stay with the children. So I've learned to be okay with saying, hey, I want to do this for me. I want to go to a conference for me that will help me professionally. Can you come for a few days and watch the children? So I needed to learn to be okay to say, I need a few days to do this. Would you be able to? And sometimes the answer is no. But I needed to learn to be okay with asking and not just remaining quiet, because a closed mouth doesn't get fed, essentially. I had to learn that. But I learned that very quickly, I would say. I learned that very quickly, especially with having a military husband. And there are two people who I would ask for help, my mom and a woman who essentially helped raise my husband, who the children view as their grandma. So she's like a mother-in-law. So those two women are the women who've helped me several times over these past 7 years that I became a mom, whether it's watching the children to go to a conference that's international or across the country somewhere else, or just for a date night for us to be able to do something for us in just a few hours. So they have been blessings for me to be able to balance life somewhat. Going back to that word balance, balance life somewhat. But I needed to learn to be able to ask, because a closed mouth doesn't get fed.
I had never heard that expression before, and it's amazing. It's really, really, I'm going to use that.
It was actually one mother mentioned that during the interviews as well, because she was struggling to pay for uniforms for her daughter after incarceration. And she asked the shelter where she was living at the time if they had any extra resources or could they support her in any way to get money for uniforms for her daughter, and they helped her get uniforms. And she said that during the interview, I learned a closed mouth doesn't get fed. So as you can see, like, things stay with me years later, like 7, 8 years later.
Yeah, and now they'll go on because I'll use that phrase.
Yes, absolutely.
So with the 3 minutes we have remaining, I know this went so fast. I could talk to you, I feel like, for the rest of the day. Let's see. I'm trying to think of, because I have so many questions, but let's just end with anyone who is also a writer and a mother, professional, doing lots of things. I won't ask advice, but what message would you have for the listeners out there? And hello to people who will be joining us later when this podcast goes up on the website and through Audible and all those platforms as well. We haven't forgotten about you.
Yes. So a message to writer mothers: remain versatile. Navigating being a writer and being a mother requires versatility and being able to adjust to those circumstances, and that's okay. Sometimes you may need to take a step back, and sometimes you realize you are able to take a step forward, and that's a part of navigating this process. It's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to say that you're not okay. I think that's really important, to own your feelings, that there's nothing wrong with feelings. Feelings are just feelings, and I say that all the time. There's nothing wrong with how you feel, and it's okay to express how you feel with others if that's your reality. So I'll leave it with that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you all for being here. Again, this interview will go up on the website, writer-mothermonster.com. It will be also produced as a podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, so you can listen to it again, share it far and wide. But again, thank you so much for joining us. And CT Lit Fest, thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.